And we're back.
Here we are.
Here for part 2.
Pandemic part 2.
We left things on a bit of a cliffhanger, a slightly ominous cliffhanger, I would say, at the end of the last episode.
Yeah. What goes up must come down.
Did it ever?
It really came down.
Yeah.
Not in a sense of the like in hindsight, looking back, it didn't destroy the business. It changed it. Almost reset back to a level that was still better than 2019, but we didn't know that at the time. It felt like the world was ending for us at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the prep, because as new entrepreneurs, we were starting to get a little bit better at looking into the next year and being like, what do we need to do for next year to make sure this is a smooth process? So in October, November of 2020, we start getting ready for this big year, because we just had a big year, and every year that we had was better than the year before. So why wouldn't the next one be better?
And we're always trying to be more and more organized, trying to plan things out farther in advance, just get things in place that need to be in place so that we can plan ahead. And ordering fabric would be the number one thing that we have to do pretty far out. And with the pandemic, that got even farther out. So it used to be that I could order fabric with our manufacturer doing custom prints about 3 months in advance.
Right.
And that was plenty of time. But yeah, so when it came to ordering fabric, I used to be able to order about 3 months out in advance. And then with the pandemic and all of the supply chain issues, it meant that it was between 6 to 8 months in advance that we had to place an order.
Was it that much?
It was so early.
I guess it didn't come till May or June of the next year.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're right. 6 to 8 months. Okay.
Yeah. And I was ordering in September. I remember early fall being especially because it was so busy, having to place an order. I was like, we need to place an order right now or we're going to run out of fabric. And the minimums are quite high, at least with this particular fabric printer that we're using. And I still love them, but that's just the reality of working with that.
Custom fabric too, or kind of slapping our logo on there and changing the design.
And they're designers and everything like that too. And it's really great quality and all of that kind of stuff. So love working with them. But we thought we were going to need much more fabric.
So what we did was we looked at our previous year and we were like, well, we doubled our revenue. We went from 1 million to 2.4. We more than doubled our revenue. So let's get cocky and say we're going to go. I remember being like, do we double again? And that seemed crazy. It was like, $4 million. Like, we can't do that in our tiny little space. We'll have to have a whole different operation. But I remember us being like, well, how about 3.5 million? That seems like we could do it.
I think even 3. I remember the number 3, but there's something
somewhere 3.5.
Fairly outrageous.
Yeah. But the track that we were on, it made sense if you look at the chart, right? And we're like, okay, why can't we do this? Which is a good thing in business to aim high and go for it. And so we were ordering that much fabric to make sure that we could fulfill $3 million worth of Beeswax food wrap orders, because I think at that time we had maybe just introduced our second product in late 2020, but it wasn't really taken off yet. So 90% of our sales were still the beeswax wrap.
Absolutely. It was still very, very much the core of what we were doing. And I remembered a lot of our bigger stockists too. I guess we didn't really have bigger stockists then because we lost a lot of those stockists. But just wanting to also, I think, be able to have some consistency in our lines as well was something that we'd been battling with over a few years. This wasn't necessarily pandemic specific, but just wanting to make sure there was at least a few prints that were constantly available. Yeah. And then we kind of developed the core line, and that's where a lot of that custom stuff developed from. And we were running out of a lot of different patterns because our sales volume was so high during the peak pandemic round in 2020. So we'd ordered all of this fabric, and that was all great, and we were very excited and also a little burnt out, but in probably the best way that you can be as a business owner, which is trying to keep up with the demand. Yeah. If I'm ever going to be tired or stressed, I'd way rather it be. I would say now that almost doesn't even feel stressful. I'm happy about it.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. Yeah.
It was a great thing.
It's still a challenge, and it still can be taxing, mentally and or physically, but it's also exciting to have to deal with that kind of a problem. And then the opposite kind of problem started to develop, which is my least favorite problem and still gives me anxiety to this day. I feel like slightly traumatized from 2021.
No doubt.
Which
2021 was a tough year.
was the downfall of the pandemic. I feel like there was a bit of a perfect storm of events when I look back on it now.
Absolutely.
In the sense that it wasn't necessarily just one thing, but so part one would be that, during 2020, there was a lot of support for small businesses. I would say both from the government and, loans and grants and all those kinds of things, as well as from the general population. People were very supportive of small businesses. I think had a really good understanding that if they didn't shop at these restaurants in these different locations in their town, that they wouldn't survive the pandemic. Not that that disappeared in 2020, but a lot of the financial aid disappeared
In 2021,
in 2021. Sorry. Yeah. So that all kind of happened in 2020. And then I think by 2021, there was, some people had been out of work for much longer. A lot of those loans started drying up. It just felt like as a whole, people were maybe hanging on to their money a little bit more, maybe a little less loose with their spending. You can only kind of justify purchases, I think, that you're holding up the economy for so long, right? That's what you're contributing. And then the biggest blow, though, that I remember was the iOS update. Anybody that's ever run digital ads knows about the iOS update. It was honestly a bit of a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
For us anyways. And we'd started seeing
inclinations.
So what was,
tell us what the iOS update was.
So we started to see a little bit of, trickling effects maybe beforehand, and we can talk about that again in a second, but just so you know what we're leading up to, the actual iOS update is when Apple decided to change their privacy policies, I believe is how that worked. And so anybody who has an Apple phone or product would have probably seen this pop up on their screen. So if they were opening something like Facebook, I forget what the exact phrasing was, but it was something in the vein of,
Ask app not to track. You still see it a lot.
Yeah. Do you want to allow this app to track on other websites?
Yeah.
Right.
It would actually happen when you did the update. It was an Apple. It was integrated into the iOS 14 update, and it would say, "Do you want to be tracked by different advertisers?"
Yeah.
And it was a scary thing. It was the way that they worded it. It felt very like, no, I don't want that. So a lot of people opted out, which, is fine. And everybody should be able to do what they want to do with their privacy. I'm surprised this wasn't a thing before. I just don't think we've really cared that much or considered how much privacy we've been giving away, and that we're the products of social media, right? Like the viewers and our eyeballs, that's where the real money is for Facebook and Instagram. So now you've got a bunch of people being like, I've watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, right? And everybody's terrified by that. So it's like, I don't want to be tracked. I'm sick of having these advertisers tracking me around the internet with their pixels and following me.
Well, and like you said, too, I think the way that it was phrased was maybe not the best explanation of the reality of what's happening or the implications or what it actually means. As soon as you hear the word tracking in the way that it was laid out, it kind of sounds like, oh, we're going to stalk you on the internet and this is going to be a weird and scary thing. And I agree. I think, everybody has a right to privacy, but I also don't think that people really understood what it actually meant. I actually left mine on for some things because I had a bit of an understanding, or at least a very loose level. I'm not a very technical person. So again, I feel like someone listening to this could be like, you're butchering this explanation. So, this is to my understanding. You were listening to our podcast. So here we are. But I remembered someone explaining it to me in a way. The reason that it impacted our business was this is a good example as to why it impacted our business. We pay for advertising, right? On Facebook, on Instagram, what is now known as Meta.
Yeah.
And we were always really lucky, and it was almost really easy for us to turn that advertising money into income.
Right.
We've always joked, you spend $1, you get $2 back. That now feels like the golden era of Facebook and Instagram advertising. You cannot do that anymore, and we'll also dive into that. But the reason for that is, this is just an example. So you and I are both on our phones. There's a lipstick company who wants to get they're advertising in front of people's eyes who are interested in certain things, or maybe, have been on other people's websites. So for me, maybe I've been to Sephora. It's tracking where I've been.
Right.
It knows, this is a prime candidate for somebody who would potentially be interested in lipstick, right? I don't know, you're going on NHL.com. You're going on, you're watching hockey things, you're listening to like whatever it is. When you could track before you had the option to opt out, it would know it, and by it I mean just like the pixel. It's not a person, just the internet. Would know, okay, Amy is a much better fit for this lipstick ad because this is her behavior. She has a high intent to buy. She does all of these other things. We're going to serve her this ad.
Yeah.
Without that, basically what people or brands have to do is to pay to show us both that ad, because they no longer know the difference between me and you.
Right.
So you're now also getting ads that you're like, what the hell is this showing up in my feed for? This has nothing to do with my interests, nothing to do with what I care about, nothing to do with really anything to do in my life. Which again, for some people doesn't really matter, right? Their ads, it's kind of irrelevant. But from a business perspective, it meant that you had to spend exponentially more to be able to find the right people, because you could no longer instantly eliminate people before you even like sent it out into the world. And I found that what also happened as a result was that businesses that had bigger budgets, that have more money to burn, that can do things like have a brand awareness campaign just to get their their product in front of people's eyes, like Coke, for example, right? They're not necessarily expecting that you're going to click on an ad and you're going to buy immediately. They have so much money on billboards, on television advertising. Those are just brand awareness, right? So that when you do decide you're going to go purchase a drink, you're kind of top of mind. Small businesses typically don't have something like that built into their budget. It's very much, we need to account for every single dollar that is coming in and out of our business. And if we're putting money out and we can't see where or how that's coming back in, you kind of have to cut that as an advertising platform, which is what we ended up eventually having to do. But it was a slightly longer road. Yeah. So that's a bit of a backstory about what the iOS update is and the impact that it had. And that happened in April of 2021. So we started seeing inclinations, rumblings, tricklings down, you might say, a little bit early on.
It was, I remember mid to end of January, our marketing agency, who we'd only ever been killing it with. Like it was like day one, we set up with them, March of 2020, late March, and just everything was just exploding out of the gate and just to the moon from there. So this was our first time feeling a bit of a lull with them, which we didn't understand. And then I feel bad about this in hindsight too, because then it started to be like, are they telling us the truth? Because we didn't know enough about the world of Facebook and Instagram marketing at the time. Like we weren't media buyers, we didn't know, and I do trust them, but it's weird because it gets wrapped up with, oh, our business is failing, and this is your guys' responsibility to figure this out. You're the media buyers. We have this agreement with you, so like figure it out kind of attitude. And we were decent at reining that in, but I still remember feeling that it's just like this total fear mentality that kicks in of like, this is our livelihood, this is everything. If this fails, what do we do? So there's this panic that's underlying there, and they were just hinting at us like, hey, the ROAS is dropping. We might need to talk about changing our terms and our agreement with you guys. And we're like, well, we can't give you more money. Like you already have the profit share that works for us, that's sustainable for our business. And then the conversations almost every 2 weeks were about, we need to change the agreement. This isn't working. And I think we got paranoid that their focus was on changing the agreement and their focus wasn't on figuring out the problem. And that's where things started to really get rocky.
Yeah, and ROAS is return on ad spend.
Yes.
For anybody listening for the lingo.
And back to Amy's thing about brand awareness campaigns. As a small business, we're just focusing on, at this point, conversion campaigns. So we're building our customer base. And it's very important for us to be able to spend money and acquire a customer rather than just spend money like a larger brand that is really just looking to keep their brand front of mind so that 6 months later when someone's ready to buy, they think of Pepsi or Coke or Walmart or whatever it is, right? Where with us, it's, we got to spend $1, hopefully retain that customer, because that money needs to be converted into buying more inventory, paying our staff, paying ourselves, paying our rent. And it's a very like fickle system in the small business world when you look at a balance sheet. Like things have to work really well, and maybe there isn't a ton of profit where you can just blindly throw 50 grand a month, or 100 or $1,000,000 or $1,000,000 a month, like some of these big brands do, into brand awareness advertising. So that was the conversion that we were working on, and the conversion started to crumble, which means we had to start to really cut spending, but it was our revenue.
Yeah.
So now you've got the gas that's like going into the engine is just starting to dry up, and we're like, are we going to be able to keep this engine running?
Well, and the reason that this was also so stressful as well, when I was talking about kind of a compound of factors, was because of the pandemic, we were forced to put all of our energy and therefore advertising and dollars into online shopping.
Right.
So as a result, it was like we had all of our eggs in one basket, and that basket happened to be Facebook and Instagram advertising. And it had been performing really, really well the year before. So why wouldn't you put all of your energy into something that is working exponentially well?
Right.
Now I would probably, in hindsight is 2020, and I would approach things a little bit differently, and we have a bit different of approach for things like that moving forward. But that was just the reality of the world, that we were kind of put into this corner where that was the only real avenue for us to generate an income from, was by doing that.
And there we'd see other opportunities pop up, but it was like, we don't have time for those. This thing is working so well that we want to focus all of our energy here. So that's, call us naive for being new and young in business, but that was the reality of it. You look at the numbers over here, you look at the margins, you look how it's keeping everything moving, and it's streamlined, it's busy. Like, we built our whole shipping and fulfillment system around our e-com business, and everything was just working so well. And then a new thing would come in, or an opportunity, and it just didn't seem like a good idea. You're like, well, this just throws a wrench in the gear of something that we can barely keep up with.
Yeah. So I feel like that would be my piece of advice, probably for anyone who's listening. It would be to keep in mind diversification.
Absolutely.
When it comes to your marketing strategy, whether it's organic or whether it's paid. I think it's good to have both, because you just never know when a whole platform is going to disappear or change what they're doing. So having your fingers in a little bit of everything, which is also very daunting for a small business, right? It's hard to do everything, but that would be, treat it like an investment portfolio.
Yeah. Like an 80-20 thing. You've got your big thing that works really well, but even if that thing's working really well and it's sustaining you want to take 20% of your energy and continue to test and dabble in different areas. Maybe you're not seeing any traction, but then one day something will go off and you're like, whoa, look, this is now working. Oh my God. Like, where did this sales channel come from? And it's like, oh, we've been kind of pecking away at it for 6 months, lightly testing, tweaking things here and there. Kind of feels like we're losing money and it doesn't work. But then eventually it just emerges. And that's kind of what we saw with TikTok this year.
100%.
Whole other talk on that, which can be very fun.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we can have
got to be testing
a couple of episodes on TikTok. That's for sure. It's a weird and wild place to live on TikTok. I'll just leave it at that for now. But yeah, and so I also remember Straw House was the company that we were working with. I think we've mentioned them a few times now. We loved all of the guys that were working there. We had a really good relationship with them. And yet they were beginning to struggle. This was also something that they've never encountered before.
Right.
So even though they're the experts and they're the media buyers and, they know what they're doing, this is a whole new world for them, and a different way that online, it's changed the face of media buying to the point that even now it's a problem that we're still dealing with at Goldilocks when it comes to online paid advertising. Like, I think it is the golden day. Those were the golden days of digital advertising, and now it's changed the game. This iOS update just changed everything. So we had a few chats with Straw House, and I think as a result, their business also decided to go in an not entirely different, it's related, but was going in a different direction. Right. We had a good enough working relationship that they were willing to keep us on as, I think, like a legacy customer.
That's when I knew that we weren't going to move forward.
That was, I think, the moment where Brett and I were just kind of, looking at each other going, okay, I think this is a sign that maybe we should just part ways. And I really appreciate that they were willing to keep us on, and that they liked us well enough. And, you know, I think as individuals as well as a business, and they're really great people, but you know,
you don't want to be in the legacy division of anybody's
you want
business.
to, you want to be working with a company that has all of their kind of heads and hats in a focused way, and has what you have hired them to do at top of mind.
Yeah.
And if that was going to be something they were going to be moving away from, I think in large part because of the iOS update, I obviously don't know the inner workings of their business, but that it just wasn't a good fit anymore. And we thought, you know what, we'll part ways and we'll move on, and we'll see if we can find something else. And at that point, I think we were maybe naive enough.
We're like, we'll just do it.
Oh,
that's what happened.
I forgot about that.
That was the worst idea ever.
Oh, I'm so excited for you to tell this story. I think I've blocked this out of my memory, and I wasn't even the one that was doing it. So how about you talk about that?
Well, I didn't dig in that far because I immediately realized I was in over my head, and it wasn't something that I cared to learn. It just wasn't my skill set. But after talking to a couple different agencies, I think where we got to was like, all right, we just got to take this in-house. And, you know, I had my buddy Tay at the time that works with Anion. Amazing local company here. I'm sure you've seen their shirts around somewhere. If you're anywhere, I don't know, probably anywhere in Canada, they've got pretty much coast to coast. I think people are wearing their Melton wool shirts. So he was doing media buying. He taught himself. I was really impressed with what he was doing. And I was like, I can just, you know, I'll work with Tay. He'll show us some stuff. And he was showing it to us. And we gave it a try with our marketing manager at the time, Steph. And me and her were working on it. And it was too much. We didn't really know. We just started losing money like crazy. And it was super cocky and naive to think that people who were media buyers for 4 or 5 years that couldn't crack the code, we could just like walk in and learn this shit and like turn it around in a couple of months. So probably 2 months. We kind of banged our head against the wall.
You hired some coaches, though. You weren't, you know, necessarily going it completely alone. You did have some support. Yeah.
Right. We got a couple of coaches. They gave us their 2 cents.
Conflicting information from what I recall.
Information made it all a lot more confusing. So, you know, between Tay and then like 2 other coaches, they were all kind of telling us their recipe for success, and none of them lined up. And we were trying all of them, and all 3 weren't working. So it was like,
I think
what is happening?
I think the reality is that everybody was just kind of floundering.
Oh, totally.
And what we saw throughout the rest of that year, we've worked with several companies since then. But I think what was happening with a lot of the subsequent companies was, especially immediately after the iOS update happened and we'd moved on to some different people, was they're trying to make the same formulas work.
Because it's all anybody knew. Media buying at that time, it's still such a new thing. Like when we talk about the OGs and the experts in the media buying industry, they've been working in it for 3 or 4 years. And those are the people who were like there from, you know, ground zero of, let's say, product-based e-commerce Shopify world. That's not a very old world. We're talking like, you know, 2018 when we started our Shopify store. I was like, you mean Spotify? Like there was still that whole thing where it was like, what the hell is Shopify? We didn't really know, and we were just regular millennial consumers, and it seemed so new and weird. So to just see that world develop and then crash, it was like everything that everyone had learned and built on just didn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, it's going to take people several months, maybe a couple years. I feel like we're still in it. Of people trying to figure out how to get the media buying machine going again for small businesses. And I don't really know if anybody has figured it out yet. If you have and you're out there, send us a message and let us know, because a lot of the small businesses are still struggling and trying to like, what do we do? How do we get this thing going again?
Yeah, most small businesses that like other owners, we have a really great community here and just people we've met through Goldilocks, and anyone that I've talked to is very much on the same train as where we were at that point. In 2021, not much has changed. It's still very much, have you figured anything out yet? Have you got a company that can get you, you know, a return on your ad spend? I know a lot of marketing companies are pushing away from, you know, using ROAS as the defining marker of success and being a bit more holistic and things like that. But there's still just a reality of the bottom line that I don't necessarily care where the money is coming from as long as there's some kind of clarity that it is coming from your effort in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And if we have been able to prove that it's actually from our own internal or organic efforts and that you're not contributing in any way because we can track a lot of that information, you know, that becomes problematic. So, yeah, if there's anyone out there that's kind of cracked this code, and
Slide into our DMs.
that's the tricky thing too. It's going to be different for every business, but I would say as a whole, most small business owners are still very much just losing money in what feels like a losing battle in the world of, you know, digital advertising right now.
Yeah, and like aside from the iOS 14 upgrade, I think the secret was out on the world had shifted to social media. If the world wasn't already mostly on social media of how they access the internet and interact with the internet and interact with the other humans on the internet, pre-pandemic, it was very apparent by the end of 2020 that that is just where most people's attention was. And if you can hit them first on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, then you have a very good chance of getting them. So then you have, you know, the less risky companies, which are the very big corporations that they have traditional methods that work for them. And maybe they were like, social media, like, yeah, sure, we'll kind of test there. That was their like testing platform. But then you see all the small businesses starting to blow up through social media, advertising or just organic or whatever it is. And now the big businesses are like, wait a minute, there's a not that they knew who we were, but for example, if they were to think this, there's a small company out of Victoria that just did $2.4 million selling beeswax wraps like on Instagram. That would immediately, they're like, well, when they're 3 years old, they'd be like, what the hell's going on here? We should definitely put money into this.
Yeah.
So now you've just got big money coming in. And if you think about it as a marketplace, as soon as it gets flooded with a lot of cash, it just makes everything more expensive.
Or like
now you're competing with the big dogs.
Or like an auction, right? Because
Exactly.
it is a bidding system,
Right.
typically the way that works. So not
If we
only
have $10 and they have 10,000, they're gonna win. They keep winning the bid,
Every
of the
time.
eyeballs and the attention. So it's like now we're in the back over here waving, be like, "Hey guys!" Like voices are fading out because we're not spending enough because we can't spend
don't
enough.
forget about us.
And that's what it felt like, and that's what happened. So, then what did we do? What was next? Then we're just trying to figure it out. We're trying to find a new agency.
So the iOS update happened in April. I believe we kind of parted ways with Strawhouse probably sometime shortly after that. So let's say brings us to like, you know, May, June. So
2021,
in 2021. So that all happens. And at the exact same time in May and June, we have this massive fabric order that just shows up on our front doorstep. So Brett and I are getting a little nervous because we're like, okay, like our outside of what we call Blue Friday, it's traditionally known as Black Friday. We're going to have our buddy Jeff on. We're going to talk about Blue Friday here shortly in a week or two. But that's our biggest sales day of the year, traditional Black Friday. Second to that is Earth Day, which is in April.
yeah.
So there was a couple of indicators to us where we're like, okay, when we do a sale, things should pick up. We should be able to get online ads working. And if they're not, well, maybe this is a bigger problem than we think it is. So the sale comes, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't anywhere near what we've done in the past. Right. So first, you know, one red flag of many. So then we end up, I think that was also a bit of a kicker too, when we were like, I don't think this is going to work with the advertising agency that we have. And then we'd had all those other conversations, all those other factors, and we decided to part ways. And then in the interim, we have, I don't know how many tons of fabric show up on our doorstep. And I remember thinking,
pallets and pallets. Pallets of fabric.
Oh my goodness. What have we done?
Yeah.
If the rest of the year continues on this trajectory, we are absolutely screwed.
Yeah. Because we still had to pay for the fabric too. That's the other crazy thing. And like we were very conservative with our money. We did a great job in 2020, stashed a lot, but you can't pay your rent in fabric. You can't pay your staff in fabric. We can't pay for the heat and electricity in fabric. So you're looking at this. I think at that point, our total fabric inventory was somewhere around like $180,000-$200,000 in just fabric. That, you know, it's great. It looks nice. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, we can't even fit this in our own studio. We had to go to the warehouse across the street and, you know, Dowell's Legends over there. Dell Storage, they totally helped us out and put away 4 pallets for us, gave us a very cheap rate. Luckily, it was right next door, but it felt so crazy to be like, we have to get additional storage space to hold all this stuff because we might not get to it for another year and a half, which I think we just 2 weeks ago we brought the rest of it like into our studio.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you're saying it's nice to look at, that was the first thing I thought of was, well, some of that fabric, we weren't even looking at it. It's just been hiding out in a warehouse for the last, year and a half or however long it's been. So that happened. And then we got into June, July. And, June's usually not too bad of a month for us. We have a pretty set sort of selling cycle that we've come to expect with Goldilocks, where we kind of have a rough idea of, when we're going to be a bit busier, when we're going to be a bit slower, when to maybe be a bit more stressed about sales being slow, and when it's just a normal part of the cycle. So June's usually not too bad. July, we usually have another
Plastic-free
sale.
July.
We have plastic free July. You'll notice that the cycles tend to skew around when we do sales. There's a reason why we space them out that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So we had a lot of staff, I remember, last year as well.
Well, we had a team of, at the peak, it was 14. I think we stabilized around 12 or 13 people. So not only do we have this raw inventory, and when I say raw inventory, it's the fabric that hasn't been converted into beeswax wraps yet, but now we have a whole other inventory problem, which is our staff has been working really hard through January, February, March, and we're working at a pace to make the $3 million goal. That's the pace that we're on. So now, like, our bins were collapsing. Like, they were just so overweighted with beeswax wraps, finished beeswax wraps, that we were like, oh, holy shit, we don't have any more bins. We can't like stash this anywhere else. We already have inventory in a warehouse across the street. Like, where do we put all this finished product?
And part of that was also because I don't know if we'd had a conscious conversation about this at this point yet, but I know subconsciously, I think we both felt the same way for a very long time. We didn't want to send any of our staff home. We didn't want to we were trying to keep everybody working, which is how the bins got so full. Because we also just were hoping and,
We'll
praying
figure out
that
the sales problem.
Yeah, it will pick up at some point, and at least we're in an industry and make a product where it doesn't expire.
Right.
Which is, it stresses me out. Even I almost just had a little mini panic attack just thinking about what that would be like if you have something that expires and you have to deal with that whole side of the logistics of everything. But so we're lucky in that way. So we could have people, they could keep making product, but even the team was getting pretty bummed out. They're like, it's not super motivating to make a product when it's not selling. There's nowhere to put it. It kind of feels like not a waste of time, but I mean, that's the only way that I can think to describe it for people, was they were just, it was kind of a bit of a downer vibe.
Yeah. And we're stressed out as owners. So that's now reflecting down onto our staff and our culture too, that it's like all is not well. And so we're kind of coming in, we're trying to put on a brave face, but we're having our own personal breakdowns because we're feeling like we're failing as business owners, therefore we're failing our staff. And, all those really negative thoughts start to creep in of like, do we have to lay people off? Like, oh, I don't want to take someone's, paycheck away. That feels like shit. And like, everyone here has been so amazing. And we have this like little tight knit group, and you don't want to break it up. And everybody's, made friendships here. And to think about that, it keeps us up at night. Then we're bringing that energy back into the studio, and you could just see things are starting to kind of unravel. And by unravel, I mean, we're tracking efficiency, and you're seeing efficiency start to go down. And of course it is. We're not moving product out the door. We're just piling it up. So people start to slow down. And, you talk about all of the inventory being, all of our cash being tied up in inventory, and we can't pay people with inventory. And then you start to see efficiency slow down, and your cash flow is based on being efficient as a small business too. So it starts to get really shaky at this point. And we really had to get to a point where it's like, we actually have to lay off our entire production staff, which felt pretty cutthroat at the time, but we let it go on probably 2 months longer than we should have. Instead of, letting off one person at a time. And I don't think that we had the ability emotionally to do that, because it's like, well, who do you pick?
Yeah,
Like, now we have
exactly.
to pick someone.
No.
Like that feels awful.
No.
And like everyone was great. So you're like, oh, like how do you do that? So I think me and you were just kind of avoiding it until it got to the point where it was like, we actually don't need to make any product for like 3 or 4 more months. We have so
Yeah.
much of a back stock. And it's just the reality of business. It sucked. It was terrible. And it felt like a huge punch in the gut. But by June, July, we didn't have a production team.
Yeah. And to all of our staff's credit, they handled that very well.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Summer in Victoria is pretty great.
yeah, Summer in Victoria is awesome, but also I think we had built enough of an awesome team and culture and almost like personal relationships with all of the people that were here that they were all very I felt like they were comforting us, honestly, when we had to lay them off, because you and I were both so upset about it, and they were so understanding. And they were like, this, obviously it sucks, but it sucked, I think, in a lot of ways too, because they wanted Goldilocks to survive.
Yeah.
For them, they're all intelligent young human beings and are able to go find other work in different fields and maybe, you know, a career path or something like that. And I felt like they were all very wonderful and understanding. And we even did like a little team event at the end of everything and got everybody gifts just as a thank you for being so awesome. And, you know, we were also sad, I think, too, because these were people we would have loved to have kept around for so much longer. And obviously, if you have to lay people off, the likelihood that they're going to go off and find a different job is quite high. Right. So it was sort of, you know, parting ways with people who we would have otherwise wanted to have, you know, hung on to here indefinitely. Like all of those people are still welcome back at Goldilocks anytime.
Yeah. And they did come back.
There's a few, some of them did come back, and we've pulled a few in other emergency situations as well. Yeah,
it was awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, at this point, we're just in full damage control. It's like battening on the hatches. Me and you reduce our salaries, and I remember going through all of our expenses weekly and just having conversations with you, being like, do we need this app? Do we need this? Can we cut this? How do we reduce this expense? So it was just damage control going down the line. Felt like, and I think the challenging thing was, I'm like, we're just back to February, March of 2020 here again. I'm like, I feel like we just did this.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about in Pandemic Part 1.
Because we did just do that.
Right. It was like, what was that? A year? We're like, this is like a year ago. Like, how is this happening twice in business? And, you know, of course, there's a crazy rush in between there that makes it feel really crazy. And, you know, the highs are high and the low are low. But it's like, how is this happening again? Like, I feel like I just went through all our expenses and like cut everything.
And you and I remember having conversations too throughout this kind of couple month period after all of this, you know, stuff happened with the iOS update is it just us? Like, is it that beeswax wraps maybe, you know, have seen their day, the market is saturated, people just aren't interested in this as a product. So we ended up exploring, that's kind of how we ended up expanding our product line, was because sales in our wraps just dropped so significantly. So we thought, well, let's at least experiment.
Yep.
You know, I feel like that's the biggest thing that you and I are pretty good at being okay with doing, is you don't know until you try. Yep. So you got to test some things out. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then you cut it and move on. So I feel like that was one way that we actually ended up expanding our line a bit. And then also,
that's when we became Goldilocks Goods.
Yeah.
We did a whole, that was probably earlier. That was like early, probably March or April. Because I remember doing that in the spring, and because I remember I was not being happy about it.
Oh, yeah.
Things were struggling. We're like, we got an idea. And they were like, do not do that. Yeah. Don't change your domain and your name and everything while we're trying to figure this out.
I thought it was earlier. I thought I changed it in the September before. Like when I can't, honestly, I don't even know what is time.
No, because it was when Steph that came in. Steph came in March of 2021.
Was it? Oh, yeah, you're right. It was in the spring. Why did I think it was in the fall?
I don't know
either. Okay, you're right. No, you are. You're right. That was like that was like one of the first things. Yeah. I should just know to believe you when you mention dates and things. I tend to screw these things up. But yeah, so there was that side of things with, you know, expanding the line and all of that kind of stuff. And then also, I had a secondary thought. Now I've lost it.
That's all right.
We'll come back to it if I come back to it.
We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we got no production team. We're working through months of inventory. I think within 2 months, we started to hire people back on. We got on the Today Show. That was pretty cool. We just got called up. It was this is so funny to think back on this because I had two conversations. There was also another gift box company in the States, Cosbox, all true. If anybody knows their story. We worked with them once. It worked out. We got paid. Might not happen for some other people. That's a whole other thing. They called us right around the same time that the Today Show, or these very nice brokers called us up that worked for the Today Show. And they were like, hey, do you have any inventory right now? Because we got this thing and somebody just dropped out. So we need to get somebody in. Can you have 3,000 units ready to go in a month? And I remember standing in the inventory room and there's all our broken shelves and there's beeswax wraps overflowing out of everything. And I'm like, yeah, we could probably make that happen. And I hung up the call and did the biggest celebration dance of just like, what the hell? Like, these people just, how did they know we had so much? And maybe there was a bunch of companies kind of going through that. But so that was August when that hit. And we cleared out our inventory. So when we knew we had that locked in, it was like this big relief. The margins weren't great, but it felt like this reset. We were still going to make some money off of it. And we're going to get our products into the hands of, 1,800, 2,000 people through these orders, through the NBC Today Show. And maybe that's just injecting some life into the company. And so at that time, then we're like, okay, now we can start hiring people on because we're just going to run our inventory down here. And we can kind of get back to business, which felt really cool, especially because the summer is usually very slow for us. And we just, again, you just keep going. Like we were just hammering our head against a wall, and then someone just picks up the phone and calls you up, and it's like, hey, can I save your business today? And you're like, yes, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was a huge I think uplift, not only financially for the business, but I think mentally for you and we needed a win and we needed that kind of relief for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was a big weight off of our shoulders as well, going through that. And then I think one of the scarier moments for me during that whole time period, like right from January through to September, like into September of 2021 of last year, was going through that phase of thinking, do people just not want beeswax wraps anymore? Maybe it's just us.
Yeah.
This is a problem, but we can fix this problem, like what I was saying earlier about different, products or things like that. And then having conversations with other businesses.
Oh yeah.
And coming back to you and being like, I don't think this is an us problem. I think this is an economy problem or a social problem. Like, this is outside of us, which in some ways is validating because we're not actually really doing anything wrong per se. And that's relief for about 0.1 seconds until you realize we're not doing anything wrong, which means there is nothing it feels like there's nothing that we can also do to change this. This is potentially out of our control. Right. And then your stomach just drops out of your body.
Well, you're like, well, there's no clear solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I would say it's out of your control at that point. A lot of, things like, even now, but I feel like that was scary at the time, but people have also now been talking about a recession for the last year and a half as well. And like all that kind of stuff. So it kind of rolls off my back a little bit better now, but it's that lack of control, I think, of the state of either the economy and purchasing power and those kinds of things where you kind of have, and I've accepted that much better now, that there's just certain things we can control and there's certain things that we can't. Right. And you just kind of have to live with it.
What can we control? Like, what is there to control in a business? Because that's a good thing to talk about, right? It can kind of always feel like a chaotic experience, and that you don't really know what's going on. Some things work, some things don't. So what would you say is a controllable thing day to day within a business?
This is a great question. I have to think about it for a second.
Okay. I got one.
Okay, you start then.
I think it's just you go back to what your core foundation of your business is, your ethos, right? So we've always talked about, the passion that built Goldilocks was that you wanted to make a product that helped your mom reduce her plastic waste consumption. And then you realized, oh, other people can do this, right? So it's like, okay, what do we do? What are we? We are an educational company that helps inspire people to live a lower waste lifestyle. and to like zoom, like just bring it back to that and just get right back in there. It's like, okay, now what do we have to do? We need to educate people to inspire them to live a lower waste lifestyle. And it just makes it really simple. And like looking back, I realized that we just didn't stop doing that. It just didn't feel like anything was working, but we're still putting money into ads. We're trying new marketing agencies. You know, that phone call from Today's Show didn't just happen. You know, we had been, you know, kind of fielding different phone calls and trying different things, sending out emails, and no one's getting back to us. But there was still effort. People were still showing up every day. So the only time I think that businesses can really fail is if you just stop, right? You stop, you go radio silent, you know, your social media channels get stale, they shut down, you stop posting, and then people will forget about you. Then the phone won't just randomly ring. And it feels random, but it's like, oh, we've been banging our head against a wall. And someone finally reached out or something finally clicked. So I think it's a really good thing when you do experience that moment in business where you feel like, oh, this is over, that back to the core, what are we doing? And then keep pushing out that message and that energy of like, what are we actually about? Just to stay relevant and stay alive.
Yeah, and I think like you're getting back to basics, which is exactly what you're saying. And then now that I've had some time to think about it, I feel like one of the things that you can always control within your business is the messaging that you put out to your customers.
Absolutely.
So whether that's through social media, whether that's through, you know, more personalized emails, and connecting with people, that's also just a form for us of getting back to our roots because we started out at farmers markets and things like that. So I would say that that is like either a lever or just an aspect of your business that is always within your control. Is that regardless of the panic that is potentially going on internally between you and your business partner and your staff, is what is it that the customer is feeling, or what is it that the potential customer is feeling from the messaging that you're putting out there, whether that's from ads that you're running? Because that was a concern that we had too, was a lot of these subsequent advertisers that we worked with, their only solution was just have a sale, just run a sale, just slash your prices. And to us, we had a conversation where we decided that that felt panicked to us. That put off an energy of
desperation.
Exactly. Which was not the energy that we wanted our customers to be feeling, because that also changes the relationship that people have with your brand, because then that becomes a dangerous expectation where, well, I got them for, 60% off this one time. Now the entire brand and product is completely devalued.
That's your price at that point.
And so that would be that's my contribution to the control levers, and that ties in with your branding, right? So your messaging is always going to be part of your branding, and one of our core pillars in our communication is always to be inspiring and uplifting. We still want to be honest with people about the state of the world and what's going on, and obviously climate change and plastic pollution are very daunting problems. And you need to be real about that, but always giving people the power and trying to empower people is a big part of what we like to do, especially with our social channels and a lot of our emails that go out. And that's something that you can always control, because some people, might get a little panicky or get really nervous. And then that energy sometimes is also just subconsciously, if you're not really aware of it, you can like very subconsciously start to bleed that into more of that like public realm and that public sphere. And it means that some of your customers, clients, or followers might just start to lose a bit of trust.
If I saw a brand do that and I was feeling that energy that, they were scrambling, they felt desperate, they needed money, so they're slashing their prices, they're constantly running a sale, the message that speaks to me is that like this company lacks conviction. I don't think they believe in what they're doing anymore, because they feel like the party is over and it's time to jump ship. And who wants to, when I think about the things that I buy, I want to have them for a long time. Like I like to buy high quality things that I have for years, right? So if I see a company doing that, I'm like, will these guys even be around in a couple of years when I still have this product? Because I don't feel like they're in it anymore. So I want to be able to, if I have a problem with this product, or maybe I want to buy another one in 2 years, I know it's still going to be there and that company's going to be moving along their path still. So it's a big turnoff, right? And I'm really glad we did that. We just kept showing up. The company's losing money, but there's this weird thing that I've learned, especially from managing the finances in a business, is that the money that you have within that business, sure, you have to take a pay cut as an owner every once in a while, but as long as you can survive and, you know, you have like food to eat and your housing is paid for, then like you're actually okay. Everything's fine. Is that money that's within the business still, even if it feels like it's dwindling away, it is like the fuel. You have to keep throwing it on the fire, right? Like it just keeps going in. And if you're not feeding the beast of the business, then that's when it's actually over. So you can cause your own demise by taking too much money out, or just saying, we're not going to try marketing at all anymore. You know, we're going to stop producing content. We're going to stop doing our newsletter because we can't spend $600 a month on our, you know, email marketing software. To me, those are like the death nails in the coffin for a business, is when you just stop spending. And like, we never did that. We just kept pounding away.
And I would say that in that time frame as well, we had pretty regular check-ins where I would ask, do we need to raise a flag? Do we have to hit the emergency button? You know, kind of like, how close are we to needing to like pull this lever, and how panicked do we need to be? Because you look after all of the finances. So I would just need to know every once in a while, how stressed do I need to be right now? Basically was really what I was asking.
We're at like a code orange, maybe. It's not red.
Yeah. Like, okay. And then we would also have some really great conversations, which this helped me. I don't know. I think it would be helpful for other people out there. It depends on your personality. I'm a bit of an overthinker. It's come up a couple times on the podcast. And we were able to talk through worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
Which was very helpful for me.
Yeah, disaster planning is good.
Yeah. Because it gives you, it's like, you just got to talk. It's scary. And I think maybe sometimes some people might avoid those kinds of conversations because it can be really difficult. But yeah, you were really good. And we had some really long, you know, like staying at the studio for 3 hours after work, just talking about, all right, if this really goes sideways, what are we going to do? What happens? Here's all the fabric. Here's how much money we have. What do we do about our staff? Like, what do you and I do after this? Like, you know, even just hypothetically, what would we be interested in doing if we weren't doing Goldilocks? Like actually having a fairly legitimate but loose plan.
Yeah.
If everything just got taken away tomorrow.
Right.
And it took away not all, but at least some of my anxiety.
Because you're a planner.
Because I like to plan.
Even if it's a bad plan or an unfavorable plan, at least it's a plan.
Exactly. Even if it's not the ideal scenario, I feel better just knowing a couple of options for paths of how things might play out.
Right.
And just kind of almost like coming to terms with it.
Right.
Even though it's a hypothetical situation. But like it did make me feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helps you, you know, maybe rein some things in your life that, you know, especially from a financial standpoint, it's like, okay, if we're on this track and this is a potential possibility that, you know, revenue continues to go down and we got to pull this lever, which is the first lever was laying off all of our staff. And then the next lever might have been like laying off one of our managers, which was like horrible to think about. We're like, hey, here's how this is going to go.
One of our managers is actually so amazing because she was involved in all of the finances as well. And just straight up told us, if you need to lay me off, like it's okay.
Oh yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah. It's not something you ever want to hear. We were like, we're not going to do that.
No.
But thank you for saying that. It's a good emotional intelligence moment there. Yeah, and you know, here we're gonna pull this lever to bring our salaries down. And I think what we realized in going through that process is kind of you beat yourself down to like, okay, what's the last lever when we just like shut this thing down? And you realize like, well, we're gonna be okay. Like we'll still be fine. We'll find another job or we'll start another business. And just going through that really painful process brought us to this place of it's gonna be okay, whatever happens. Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
Okay. And then maybe we talk about the other great phone calls that we started to get in September. Kohl's, Jilly.
Oh, yeah. Was that in September? Yeah. So it went, what goes up must come down. But by September, it started to level out a little bit, I would say. We had some really exciting deals that came up in the fall and kind of going into the fall. It carried over into it made for a very busy winter last year. Winter, I mean, winter's always busy.
The beginning of the year was insane for us.
Yeah, November onwards is always hectic because of, Christmas.
Yeah.
But typically we have a bit of a downtime in January. But yeah, we got our first very out of the blue.
Can we just tell the Kohl's story right now?
Should we do
it's pretty funny.
Okay, yeah, we'll do the Kohl's, or should we save it for the next one? You know what? We should have a whole Kohl's.
All right,
We're going to save it.
Yeah.
I think we should do, but we'll leave it as another bit of a cliffhanger in that. Yeah, we got an out of the blue phone call from Kohl's and started talking to some of our lovely friends over at the Jilly Box.
Woo.
So we'll talk about our winter 2021 into this year, because those were two of, still to date, the two biggest orders we've ever done, and we completed them side by side at the same time.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And part of that was because of the, not panic, but I think just the stress of that year and not wanting to turn down some of those opportunities that was really going to bring some cash flow through the business. Whether it's profit is, a different story, but at least cash flow through because we had so much money tied up in fabric. So let's lean into that in the next podcast.
Fun. Cool. Okay. Until next time, everyone.
Bye for now.